Brief History of USA and Expansion and Reform, 1830 to 1848.
In 1801, the Cane Ridge Revival drew upwards of 20,000 participants, symbolizing the explosive growth of evangelical Protestantism on the frontier. This fervor marked the height of the Second Great Awakening, a movement that rejected Enlightenment rationalism in favor of emotional, personal conversion. Circuit riders like Peter Cartwright traveled to remote frontier locations, bringing the gospel directly to isolated settlers. Their egalitarian message emphasized that any individual could choose salvation, a sharp departure from traditional Calvinist predestination. In the burned-over district of New York, Charles Grandison Finney pioneered new measures, like the anxious bench, to engineer religious revivals. He taught that a revival was not a miracle, but the result of the right use of means. The doctrine of perfectionism became the movement's spiritual engine, holding that individuals and society could be freed from sin through moral effort. Converted Christians felt a divine obligation to purify the world in preparation for Christ's return. By 1840, Methodists and Baptists had become the largest denominations in the United States. Their success lay in welcoming passionate, untrained preachers who resonated with the common man. This era of religious ferment birthed new movements, including the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, founded by Joseph Smith in 1830. Facing persecution, Smith's followers began a long migration that would eventually lead them to Utah. William Miller predicted the second coming of Jesus for October 21st, 1844. When the prophecy failed, an event known as the Great Disappointment, many of his followers reorganized into the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Seeking a more wholesome and simple life, Transcendentalists founded Brook Farm in 1841 to bridge the gap between intellectual and manual labor. They believed that God's voice spoke through human instinct and nature. Margaret Fuller, a leading transcendentalist, edited the journal The Dial and challenged patriarchal norms in her work Woman in the 19th Century. She urged women to develop their own relationship with God, rather than sinking into marital dependency. The Awakening fueled the Benevolent Empire, a massive network of voluntary associations dedicated to social uplift. These organizations used modern printing and postal systems to flood the nation with reform literature. The temperance movement became a cornerstone of this reform impulse, viewing alcohol as the root of poverty and domestic violence. Early advocates like Lyman Beecher urged total abstinence from hard liquor. Dorothea Dix launched a landmark investigation into the horrific treatment of the mentally ill in jails. Her lobbying efforts forced state legislatures to fund humane institutions and state-run asylums. The completion of the Erie Canal in 1825 linked Western farms with Eastern cities, sparking the market revolution. This new interconnectedness allowed goods to be shipped faster and cheaper across long distances. Robert Fulton's steamboats transformed river travel, allowing vessels to move against the current and reducing shipping times significantly. This technological breakthrough integrated the Midwest and South into global trade networks. By the 1830s, railroads began to compete with canals, providing faster and more reliable links between growing commercial centers like Cincinnati and Chicago. This transportation revolution shifted the center of the American population westward. In 1844, Samuel Morse introduced the telegraph, allowing messages to travel almost instantaneously. This transformation in communication allowed business and government to operate across vast distances with new efficiency. Eli Whitney's cotton gin made short staple cotton highly profitable, transforming Southern agriculture and cementing "cotton is king" as the economic motto of the era. The cotton boom triggered the Second Middle Passage, a massive internal forced migration of over 1 million enslaved people from the Upper South to the cotton kingdoms of Alabama and Mississippi. In 1830, President Andrew Jackson secured the narrow passage of the Indian Removal Act, which authorized him to negotiate land exchange treaties with Eastern tribes. Jackson viewed removal as a military necessity and a national priority. The discovery of gold on Cherokee lands in 1830 brought a tide of white settlers to Georgia, leading the state to declare Cherokee laws null and void. The ensuing Georgia Gold Rush intensified the pressure for removal. In Worcester v. Georgia, 1832, the Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a sovereign entity, subject only to federal law. However, President Jackson reportedly refused to enforce the decision, leaving the Cherokee vulnerable. The Choctaw were the first to be removed in 1831, serving as a model for all future relocations. Their journey was marked by flash floods, freezing temperatures, and starvation, with thousands dying en route. In 1835, a minority faction signed the Treaty of New Akota, ceding all Cherokee land in exchange for $5 million and Western Territory. Principal Chief John Ross and over 16,000 Cherokees signed a petition protesting the fraudulent agreement. In 1838, under orders from President Van Buren, General Winfield Scott forcibly removed the remaining Cherokee. This trek, known as the Trail of Tears, resulted in the deaths of 4,000 Cherokee people from exposure and disease. In July 1832, President Jackson vetoed the rechartering of the Second Bank of the United States, BUS, viewing it as a corrupt monopoly that served the elite. This initiated the Bank War, a bitter political struggle over the nation's financial soul. Nicholas Biddle, the bank's director, fought to save the institution, but Jackson ordered the withdrawal of federal deposits. This victory for Jackson's Democrats dismantled the central bank and returned financial power to state institutions. Federal funds were moved to state-chartered pet banks, which lacked proper oversight. Without federal regulation, the money supply swelled as hundreds of new banks issued paper currency with little restraint. This credit expansion fueled a massive real estate bubble in Western lands. Land sales skyrocketed from $2 million in the 1820s to over $25 million by 1836, driven by risky lending and rampant speculation. To curb inflation and protect the government, Jackson issued the Specie Circular in 1836, mandating that public lands be paid for only in gold or silver. This order diverted precious metals from Eastern financial centers to the West. The Specie Circular abruptly burst the land bubble. Land prices plummeted, and investors who had purchased property with depreciating banknotes found themselves holding overvalued assets. On May 10, 1837, New York banks stopped redeeming their notes in gold and silver, bringing commerce to a standstill. This triggered a nationwide financial collapse known as the Panic of 1837. The panic led to a major depression that lasted until the mid-1840s. Profits, prices, and wages dropped, while unemployment rose, leaving 1/3 of the workforce jobless in some areas. Martin Van Buren inherited the crisis just weeks after taking office. His perceived inability to act, combined with continued high interest rates from Britain, caused the dire financial situation to worsen. The crisis was a transatlantic event. Credit expansion in Chinese commodities like silk and tea overextended merchant houses from London to New York. When the bubble burst, it shattered global trade networks. In response to widespread business failures, abolitionist Lewis Tappan founded the Mercantile Agency. His nationwide network of credit reporters became the direct predecessor of today's credit ratings industry. To secure federal funds from future bank failures, the Independent Treasury Act was finalized in 1846. This policy completely severed the federal government from the private banking system.
In 1831, William Lloyd Garrison launched his uncompromising newspaper, The Liberator, in Boston. He demanded immediate, unconditional emancipation and shifted the anti-slavery debate from gradualism to moral urgency. Frederick Douglass, a formerly enslaved man, became the nation's most famous abolitionist. His powerful speeches and slave narratives shaped national identity and built a moral case against human bondage. The American Anti-Slavery Society launched a massive petition drive, sending hundreds of thousands of signatures to Congress. These petitions often specifically called for the abolition of slavery in the District of Columbia. In May 1836, the House of Representatives passed the gag rule, which automatically tabled all petitions relating to slavery. Pro-slavery politicians argued this was necessary to prevent irritation and preserve order.
Former President John Quincy Adams became a central figure in the fight against the rule, calling it a direct violation of the Constitution. He argued that the right to petition was essential to Republican self-governance. Senator John C. Calhoun vigorously defended slavery as a positive good, arguing it was a benevolent institution superior to Northern industrial wage slavery. He warned that abolitionists were ignorant fanatics threatening Southern safety. Southern states blocked abolitionist literature from reaching their citizens, fearing it would foment rebellion. They viewed the mailing of anti-slavery tracts as a wanton and dangerous interference with their way of life. When Lucretia Mott was denied a seat at the 1840 World Anti-Slavery Convention due to her sex, she and Elizabeth Cady Stanton resolved to organize their own movement. They realized women were socially barred from leadership roles. Margaret Fuller's groundbreaking book called for increased legal rights and equality within marriage. Her transcendentalist focus on spiritual independence became influential in the burgeoning women's rights movement. In July 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention was held to discuss the rights of women. Attendees included prominent reformers like Frederick Douglass, who supported the radical demand for women's suffrage. The delegates adopted the Declaration of Sentiments, modeled after the Declaration of Independence. It accused the nation of hypocrisy for failing to extend the principles of natural rights to half its population. These reform movements were interconnected through overlapping networks of activists. Participation in one movement often led activists to recognize other systemic injustices, forging a broad age of reform. In 1845, journalist John O'Sullivan coined the term manifest destiny to describe the belief that America was divinely ordained to expand across the continent. Many believed God wanted Americans to spread democracy and capitalism to the Pacific. This ideology rationalized territorial expansion as justifiable, inevitable, and preordained. However, it was rooted in racial chauvinism and the assumption of white American superiority over other nations and peoples. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, sparking a major land dispute with Mexico. Expansionists saw this as a key step in fulfilling the providential mission of the Republic. President James K. Polk, an ardent expansionist, oversaw the greatest territorial growth in U.S. history. He supported Manifest Destiny and believed Mexico's perceived inferiority justified American acquisition of its land. As the nation expanded, the profitable slave-based cotton boom followed. Manifest Destiny clearing indigenous land in the South opened millions of acres to the expansion of the plantation economy and slavery. In July 1845, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor into disputed territory between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers. A subsequent skirmish in April 1846 provided the grounds for a declaration of war. Polk petitioned Congress for a declaration of war, claiming Mexican forces had shed American blood upon American soil. While many initially supported the conflict, anti-slavery Whigs attacked it as a slave power plot to expand slavery. In August 1846, Democratic Representative David Wilmot proposed a proviso that neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any territory acquired from Mexico. This Wilmot proviso sparked a political firestorm that divided the nation along sectional lines.
Unlike abolitionists, free soilers like Wilmot were often unconcerned with racial equality. They opposed the expansion of slavery to protect free white labor from the competition of wealthy planter elites. To avoid a two-front war, Polk compromised with Britain in 1846, signing the Oregon Treaty to divide the territory along the 49th parallel. This added the lower Columbia Basin to the United States and secured the Pacific Northwest. American military success culminated in the occupation of Mexico City. However, the war's end brought domestic turmoil, as the question of whether the new lands would be free or slave deeply divided the country. Under the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico ceded over 525,000 square miles of territory to the U.S. This massive acquisition instantly reignited the explosive national debate over the future of slavery. In early 1848, gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in California. This discovery set off a rush of prosperity, and thousands of 49ers began pouring onto the West Coast. The California gold rush put an end to the nation's lack of specie and shifted focus to the admission of new Western states. California's request for admission as a free state would soon push the country closer to the edge. Within the Democratic Party, anti-slavery barn burners, led by Martin Van Buren, clashed with conservative hunkers over the Wilmot Proviso. They were named after farmers willing to burn their own barns to root out a rat infestation. The Democratic Party nominated Lewis Cass, who championed popular sovereignty, proposing that settlers themselves decide whether to allow slavery. This ambiguous policy allowed both Northern and Southern voters to interpret it in their own favor. Disgusted by the major parties' compromises, conscience Whigs and barn burner Democrats joined with the Liberty Party to form the Free Soil Party in 1848. They rallied under the slogan of protecting free labor and white workers. The Free Soilers nominated Martin Van Buren, marking the first time a national political party committed itself solely to stopping the expansion of slavery. He declared slavery inconsistent with the principles of the American Revolution. The Free Soil Party moved away from moral arguments about slavery, focusing instead on the economic livelihoods of white workers. This moderate stance aimed to attract Northern voters who feared the political influence of the slave power. Radical abolitionists like Garrison refused to support the new party, arguing it was racist and that its slogan really meant freedom only for white men. They remained committed to immediate, total emancipation everywhere. The Whig Party nominated Zachary Taylor, a slaveholding hero of the Mexican-American War. By offering no official party platform, Taylor successfully appealed to a broad national coalition of voters. In the election of 1848, Van Buren captured over 10% of the popular vote. By drawing vital votes away from Cass in New York,
The Free Soil Party contributed directly to Zachary Taylor's victory. Beyond the presidency, the Free Soil Party won over a dozen seats in the House, ensuring that the slavery question would remain at the center of the national political debate. This small bloc now held the balance of power. The fallout of 1848 signaled the end of the second party system. By bringing the expansion of slavery to the forefront, the era set the United States on an irreversible trajectory towards civil war.